Good afternoon, guys. Welcome to the Label Reading for Heart Health Live. I am so excited to jump into this topic with you. February is American Heart Month, so talking about heart health with our patients is really a great topic this month and every single month throughout the year, but I really wanted to highlight the topics that are most important for heart health throughout the month within our community. So today we are going to dive into label reading for heart health specifically. If you do have any additional suggestions or tips or tricks that you want to share with the community, please make sure that you drop your comments below and everybody else can just see those suggestions and use those if they feel like that is useful for their patients in their care. So let's dive into label reading for heart health. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and let's get into it. Okay, so what you're looking at here is just an overview of how we can look at label reading for heart health in particular. So one of the first things that is most helpful to look at when we are looking at heart health and label reading in general is number one, that serving size. So we want to make sure that our clients are aware of what the serving size is for a food item, because that is what all the information below it is based off of, is that serving size. I've had some patients in the past, and I'm sure you have too, where they were really surprised with why like the serving size was so small. So for example, I was doing a grocery store tour with a patient and we were looking at the label reading of a gallon of milk. And what they shared with me is, oh, I thought this nutrition facts label was based on the whole package of the gallon of milk, which would be great, right? But what he was actually doing was thinking that he was getting less nutrition than he was actually getting. So being able to make those switches with portion sizes can be really helpful with helping our patients create those nutrition changes. So serving size is really important for us to start with. We also want to look at the calories piece here. That is really helpful just so our clients can kind of see the comparison. But the second thing that's really important for heart health in particular is total fat. So some clarification on total fat can be really helpful. So for example, total fat includes the saturated fat, the unsaturated fat, and the trans fat number. So when we're looking at this label in particular, what you're seeing is the total fat is 8 grams here. Saturated fat is 1 and 0 grams is for the trans fat. So those numbers don't all add up, right? So when we're looking at this, sharing with our patients that the unsaturated fats make up the rest of the total fats in that number, so that can clarify any confusion that may come up. Now, legally, unsaturated fats are not required to be on the nutrition facts label. Some companies will include those because we know through the research that choosing foods with more unsaturated fats versus saturated fats are encouraged because that can actually help lower our LDL cholesterol and other cholesterol related labs. So that number is really helpful for your patients to understand that total fat includes all of the numbers of the types of fats in the food. The next thing that can be really helpful to look at is the saturated fat number. So saturated fat, if we are eating foods that are higher in saturated fat regularly, and we have higher LDL cholesterol and total cholesterol, then this might be something that we want to take a look at and reduce. So with saturated fats, what we know is that a saturated fat food is considered to be low in saturated fat if it has 1 gram of fat or less per 100 calories. So that can be something to look at. So if I come back over here and this food here has 1 gram per 230 calories, it is going to be a low saturated fat food just by knowing that little bit of information there. So that can be super helpful too with a quick look at their food. The next number to look at, number 4, is trans fat. So this number right here. So trans fat, this is one that is known to increase our risk for heart disease. So the suggestion with trans fat is to try to avoid trans fat foods period, across the board. So sources of trans fat can include things that have partially hydrogenated oils, baked goods, snack foods, even fried foods are going to be a source of trans fats. So trans fats are known to actually raise our total cholesterol and our LDL cholesterol. So these ones we actually want to avoid as best as possible. So having 0 grams of trans fat is really, really important. The other really important place to look for trans fats on the food label is in the ingredient list. So when folks are looking at the ingredient list, they do want to make sure that the food doesn't include any partially hydrogenated oils in that ingredient list. And I'll kind of talk through why that is the case in just a minute when we're talking about nutrient claims on labels. The next thing that can be really helpful when we are looking at the nutrition facts label for heart health is checking out the sodium. So sodium is something that can, for some folks, be a contributing factor for high blood pressure. And if somebody does experience high blood pressure or hypertension, looking at their sodium intake can be a really great place to start creating some change. So if they have high blood pressure, it is suggested to start lowering their total sodium intake to 2,300 milligrams per day. And I like to break that down between meals because 2,300 milligrams per day, well, what does that mean? That can actually kind of level out to be about 500 to 700 milligrams of sodium at each meal. So that can make it a little bit smaller of a target for our folks to help them with the label reading for heart health. Now, if somebody does have high blood pressure and they're not able to lower their blood pressure by that 2,300 milligram target, then the next thing would be trying to go 2,300 or to 1,500. So anywhere within that range of 1,500 to 2,300 milligrams per day can be a suggestion for sodium to help with high blood pressure. But again, that still lines up with that 500 to 700 milligrams of sodium per meal if they're trying to hit that target of 1,500 to 2,300 milligrams per day. So I hope that's a helpful little tip. The other thing that we want to look at when we're thinking about heart health is dietary fiber. Now, we know through the research that dietary fiber is a great way to help lower cholesterol. I remember asking this question when I was in school, and I was like, how does cholesterol do that? Like, what is the piece that really brings about that change? Because I knew that fiber could help lower cholesterol, but I didn't know the process. So what I learned through the research is that the fiber in our food actually absorbs cholesterol because bile makes up cholesterol. So the fiber in our diet absorbs the cholesterol. And when we go to the restroom, it's removing that cholesterol from our body. So that can actually help lower our total cholesterol, our LDL cholesterol, so on and so forth. So that is a really, really powerful tool of fiber in our diet. So one thing that I do want to highlight here is for most of us, shooting for a target between 20 and 35 grams of fiber per day can be a good target. Now, we do want to encourage our patients or clients to increase that number slowly over time while also increasing their hydration, right? So we know that that can really impact gut comfort if they increase fiber too quickly. So we want to do that gradually over time. But as a reference point for fiber in our diet, if we are looking at dietary fiber here, this is kind of a fun little tip to look at. A good source of fiber has 2.5 to 4.9 grams of fiber per serving. An excellent source of fiber has 5 grams of fiber or more per serving. So when we look at this food item here, we can see that it has 4 grams. So really quick reference, we can jump back up here and see that this is a good source of dietary fiber based on that information. The other key thing that I think is a really helpful tip for folks is recognizing where fiber comes from. So fiber comes from plants. Period. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. So when folks are thinking about, well, where do I find fiber in my diet? Just let them know it comes from fruits, vegetables, whole grains, nuts and seeds. Fiber comes from plants. And then sometimes I'll do a little Q&A with my clients and say, hey, so does this food come from a plant or is this food an animal product? And then we can really break that down really quickly to increase their confidence of if this food has fiber or not. All right, then the next thing to look at on label reading for heart health is added sugar. A really great change that did come up when they changed the nutrition facts label was they started including added sugar. Previously, when we had the label, all it included was the total sugars number here. Total sugars represents natural and added sugars to that food. So it wasn't really super helpful. We weren't really sure how many grams of added sugar were in this food. So this was a really great addition. So added sugar actually includes the amount that is added to the recipe from like the facility or the ingredients that are added to that product. So this can be really helpful for folks that are trying to gradually lower added sugar to their diet as well. So the American Heart Association does have a suggestion for limiting added sugar. For women, the suggestion is having less than 6 teaspoons per day. For men, the suggestion is having less than 9 teaspoons per day. And just as a tip, 1 teaspoon is equivalent to 4 grams. So if I use that information, I know that 6 teaspoons, so 6 times 4 is 24 grams. 9 times 4 is 36. So per day, that is the suggestion, whoopsies, that is the suggestion, the number of grams that are suggested for somebody to have of added sugar per day. So for this food, if I come over here, this 2/3 cup of this food has 10 grams of added sugar. And if 4 grams is 1 teaspoon, then if I divide 10 by 4, that's going to give me 2.5 teaspoons of added sugar. So this food has 2.5 teaspoons of added sugar. So if somebody is saying, I love this food, I want to have it, indefinitely, that's great. How are they going to fit the rest of the sugar that they may be having in the day around this food if this is, really their high priority food? So that can be really helpful talking folks through the added sugar piece as well. Now, to make label reading really, really easy, I love starting my clients off with percent daily value. So percent daily value is powerful because it can give you a quick reference, somebody to look at the percentages and say, okay, great, this food by this percentage is considered to be low in this nutrient, and by this percentage is considered to be high. So just as a reference point, the percent daily value is based off of a 2,000 calorie diet. So when you are sharing this information with your clients, just make sure to let them know that if their nutrient needs are lower than this or higher than this, then this like percent daily value may be, a little bit skewed, but it is going to at least give them an idea of if this nutrient in this food is considered to be low or high. And then if we're looking at heart health, how that can relate back to their heart health priorities. So if the percent daily value is 5% or less in that food, the amount of that nutrient is considered to be low. So if we're thinking about heart health, big things that we want to keep low would be saturated fat, sodium, added sugar, trans fat, and for some folks that can be cholesterol as well if they are a high responder to dietary cholesterol. If they are trying to look for foods that might be higher in specific nutrients, then we want to look for 20%. So 20% is considered to be high in that nutrient per serving of this food. So there's going to be certain things that we want to have higher amounts of, and that can be fiber and vitamins and minerals. So if we come back up here and look at this food label in particular, just as a quick little run through, what we notice here is there are some nutrients that are going to be by definition low. So if we look at the 5% here for saturated fat, that is going to be low in that nutrient. Hooray. Okay, great. So this is wonderful for our heart health patients. The other thing that we want to look at is, where there might be some things that might be higher. Okay, so we've got 20% here for added sugar. Now, again, like we were talking about earlier, we know that by definition, this is going to be high in added sugar. However, if somebody really loves this food, it's not that it's completely off the table. It's just figuring out, okay, can they reduce the added sugars in other foods throughout the day? So they're still, working towards that target of 6 teaspoons per day for women and 9 teaspoons per day for men of those added sugars. So we know that this is low in saturated fat. It is high in added sugars. What are some other things that it's going to be high in? Well, by percentage, we know that it's going to be high in calcium and it's also going to be high in iron, which is great. So that is wonderful. But what about these percentages that are right in the middle there? So what about, 10%, 13%, 14%, 10%? What does that mean? Can we give some guidance to our clients on these numbers? One thing that you can do is you can look at this and say, okay, 5% is considered to be low, 20% is considered to be high. Now, the closer we get to 20%, it is going to be considered to be high. So if they are looking for a range, if they can keep those specific nutrients, so saturated fat, trans fat, added sugars, things like that, if they can keep them lower in sodium, then looking for 10%, 5% or lower can be a range. So if we can keep things less than 10% for those nutrients most often, great. That can be, a little bit of wiggle room. So they're not feeling like I can only have 5% of these nutrients. The closer things get to 20%, so specifically when we were talking about dietary fiber here, we said already that this is actually a good source of fiber. And if we come to the percentage, it is, it's going to be closer to 20% than it is to 5. And we know that if it was at 5 grams, it would be an excellent source. So this would be bumped up to closer to 20% for that. So just to give you an idea, when we are wanting nutrients to be higher, the closer it is to 20%, thumbs up. If we want things to be lower, the closer it is to 5%, thumbs up. So this is something to consider when you're talking to your patients about label reading for heart health. I hope this resource was really helpful for you. And if you do have any suggestions or additional comments that you like to share with your clients, please drop them below. I think it's really helpful for us as a community to walk through these suggestions and talk through things, see what works well, see other tips or suggestions that work for you, but I'd love to hear from you. The other thing that I did want to highlight here is just looking at specific nutrition claims on labels. This can also be really helpful for our clients, specifically if they're trying to figure out what low fat, reduced fat, like no fat, all of those things are added. So I'm going to specifically look at the claims for fat on the labels. So if a food claims to be fat-free, this is what it means. It means that it has less than 0.5 grams of fat per serving. So that doesn't mean 0, it just means less than 0.5. So remember previously when I was talking about trans fats, if it says that it has 0 grams of trans fat, it can claim it is trans fat free. But that's why it's really important that we look at the nutrition ingredients list to make sure that there isn't any partially hydrogenated food oils in there. So just that little tip, I just wanted to share that with you. There is a lot of information that folks can learn from the nutrition facts label. And I do hope this really quick little guide through heart health, label reading, and the tips and tricks that I use with my clients is helpful for you. And if you have any additional thoughts or questions or suggestions, let me know. I can't wait to hear from you. I hope you have a great day and we'll talk to you soon.